Chopin mazurkas are elusive little things. I played my first one sometime in middle school. It's filled with pride and good humor in B-flat major. Then all of a sudden slips away into some faraway land. But not for long, as the scene changes back to the jovial dance. Then in high school, I entered a local competition where the required piece was the E minor Mazurka, Opus 17, number 2. A moody piece, but exactly what moods, I couldn't tell. The music contained a mixture of emotions and mental states that was lost on my adolescent ears. Back then, I was a Polonaise guy. Those epic tales of war and heroism. But inside the great battlefield of the F-sharp minor Polonaise, Chopin has a dream in the form of a mazurka. This music always gave me goosebumps. And it was the first time any kind of mazurka ever whispered its secrets to me. And the older I get, the more its 59 cousins composed across the span of Chopin's life do too. The mazurkas feature some of Chopin's most radical music, filled with experimental harmony and elusive rhythms, in some cases decades ahead of their time. And in them, we often hear the composer longing for something perennially out of his reach. The mazurkas are Chopin's private diaries. Even the most extroverted dances among them have an inward, reflective character. They're portraits of an artist's psyche worn by social tensions that reveal a whole catalog of human emotions, even capturing those complex emotions we don't always have a name for. This is no more evident than in that notoriously ambiguous Mazurka, Opus 17, number 4. Officially in the key of A minor, although it never officially begins, nor ends, nor ever fully arrives there. The music is sad, but it's not sobbing. It's mourning, but not dwelling. It's yearning, yet resigned. This is music that eludes your grasp, but you never stop reaching for it. Welcome to Season 2 of the Chopin Podcast. I'm your host, Ben Laude, and over the course of this series, we're diving deep into the music of Frédéric Chopin, with episodes on each of Chopin's major compositional genres. This is the first of 2 episodes dedicated to the mazurkas. The first of the pair will focus more on the legacy of interpretations of the mazurkas at the piano, and the second will take a broader view, exploring the diverse styles and cultural meanings of the mazurkas over the past 200 years. In this episode, Garrick Ohlsson deciphers select mazurkas from across Chopin's compositional periods. Music critic Jed Distler recommends some of the finest mazurka recordings of the past century. And finally, Juilliard professor Jerome Lowenthal listens to mazurka recordings made by his teacher, the legendary William Capell, and compares them to other luminaries of 20th century piano playing. You can listen to full episodes of the Chopin Podcast on podcasting platforms the day of release, or watch video segments from each episode in the following days as they're posted to my YouTube channel. Just look up my name, Ben Laude. That's BenLaude. This podcast is produced in partnership with the Chopin Foundation of the United States, presenters of the National Chopin Competition in Miami, Florida, every 5 years. I was thrilled to host the live streams of the Miami competition this past January, and am excited to continue my collaboration with the Chopin Foundation through to the International Chopin Competition held in Warsaw this fall. The honorary chairman of the U.S. Chopin Foundation is none other than Garrick Ohlsson, who will be with us every step of the way during this podcast series. To this day, Garrick is the only pianist from the United States ever to win first prize at the International Chopin Competition, And in October 2025, he will become the first ever non-Pole to chair the competition in Warsaw. Garrick is one of the few pianists ever to record Chopin's complete works, published by the Hyperion label. Many of the recordings heard during this series are taken from that set. Digital downloads of the complete cycle are available for purchase on Hyperion's website. As precocious as Garrick was as a young Chopin player, the Mazurkas didn't strike a chord with him at first. But he would soon embrace them as he prepared for the 1970 Chopin competition in Warsaw.
I didn't get the Mazurkas. As a matter of fact, I had a Rubinstein again, a single LP called Mazurkas and Polonaises, which had on it a whole side extracted from his complete Mazurkas of an LP. The other one had, I think, the Polonaise Fantasy and maybe the Andante Spinato. That's the side I played. I was much more interested in those because they were, I was probably 10, and a 10-year-old young boy doesn't usually go for meditative inward music or complex or slightly weird or little evanescent music like the Mazurkas are. Yeah, I didn't really get them at all, and I just thought, oh, that's something boring. Until I started studying with Rosina Lhévinne when I was 20. As I've told the story many times, she diagnosed that I was a born Chopin player, which for her was a very, very, very high and special compliment. But she asked me if I played Mazurkas, and I said no. And she said, well, you must play Opus 50, number 3. And I didn't know why or what. And so I learned it, and that was some of the best lessons I had with her. Principally, she wanted me to do the narration of the piece. You know, the fact that there's this contrapuntal introduction with a 2-voice canon. And she said these accents in Chopin that begin pieces sometimes, they're an invitation to come in. She said it's not a vertical accent. It's not just... One of her teaching techniques was to say, let your hands slide along be gentle with the piano, come to me, not hit. But then she taught me very clearly that these Mazurkas, although they're not very long, are a bit like the waltzes. They're made up of sections of different dances, which are all sort of included under the same umbrella. This is one of the most developed Mazurkas. You have an 8-bar intro before the dancing even starts, and it's only suggested. Then you immediately get something which is so typical of Mazurkas, and but it was an entirely different character, and she insisted this not be played, it's forte with accents, not be played in a genteel way, not in a... Not in what I would call a false musical way, obviously not brutal either. But you have a downbeat, unmistakably, after this. But then the second beat has an accent, which is typical of the melodic structure of many Mazurkas. There's often an accent on 2, and it's not always an accent of force, but in this case, it's an accent of force. 1, 2. And then you have this lively rhythm. And then you don't have the second beat accent again, but you have a third beat accent. And I did what I think is called an agogic. I emphasized the third beat accent by not only playing it loud, but waiting just a little bit. You can still feel it as 1, 2, 3. And often in the livelier, more countryside Mazurkas, the dancers will actually leap up into the air on the second beat and then click down with their heels on the 1, 2, 3 or clap their hands that way. So it's not 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 3. You've got to give the dancer time to get back to earth. Gravity does its job. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and so on. So that was that. Then it gets contrapuntal for a while. But then there's another dance, a much simpler one. Which per se is not the most inspired thing he ever wrote.
I've always thought that about this piece. It's like it starts so learned, and then it has this really raucous waltz that you just talked about, and then it just gets almost pedestrian
right after it's gotten very complicated. But we don't have time to go to through every note. I do wish we could do 60 episodes on these pieces. So anyway, but what that does compositionally, and I think Madame Lhévinne talked about it and made me aware of it, is she said it's a very simple, very folksy dance, which sort of, gives a plateau of not much activity, because the activity that comes after it will become very intense and becomes more intense as a result.
It's not about this theme being so genius. It's how it situates itself in the form of the piece.
Exactly. And she pointed out that even though you don't do much of anything about it, every 2 bars, there's a third beat harmonic accent in the left hand. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it's not, because you'd often hear it played as if it's some lovely parlor 19th century sweet piece. Then, as Madame Lhévinne insisted, that there's a love song. And that's an extravagant Chopin moment for 4 whole bars, and she said, and I won't attempt to imitate her charming Russian accent. She said, this is where the tenor declares his love for the soprano, right? According, as far as I remember from Madame Lhévinne, then the woman answers, "Oh, no, you don't." And they dance together some more. So there's a little story here, and Madame Lhévinne was very insistent that you kind of tell this story. Now, she didn't have a tale for every bar, but she gave me very much that idea. And at the end, when this chromatic stuff really reaches an enormous climax, she was insistent on pointing out that, which I now call it almost a Beethoven thing, when you come to the top, it says crescendo, crescendo, crescendo to a real climactic chord. She said, very 19th century attitude, she said, people must tremble from the passion and the tragedy of that. And she didn't tell me what the tragedy was, but it's clear to hear it. And after that, there's one voice. We have an incredible quasi-contrapuntal coda which dies away in that kind of snowy wintertime. She made me realize there's a big story to be told here, and it's not to be told by just playing nicely. But that's the only one I knew. And when I was preparing for the Chopin competition when I was 22, I had to play 3 Mazurkas from the same opus, my choice of and all the major opuses. And, well, when you have to, you have to. So I learned 3 of the Mazurkas from Opus 41, and I can't say I really got them at first, even then, how great they were. I know everybody said they were. All the best grown-up people said they were jewels beyond price in Chopin, which I certainly agree with now. But somehow it was a little abstract for me, and I was also the victim of the way, I would say, a lot of people at Juilliard and even fine pianists in New York concert halls played mazurkas sort of as slow, melancholy waltzes. And although that's one aspect of them, that is not the principal thing. And I didn't understand their ethnic or their folk origin quite. So I trundled off to Poland anyway, and I won the competition. But not only that, I won the special prize of Polish radio for the best performance of mazurkas, which really astonished me. And so suddenly I was declared an expert, and I thought, oops, I better learn some more.
May I just refresh your memory a little bit about how that may have gone?
Oh,
A very sad rendering, I have to say.
yes, very sad. And I'll tell you exactly who I cribbed it from. I'm not above cheating or borrowing, shall we say, or being inspired, whichever way you want to call it. My teacher, Olga, also had a 10-inch LP recording on, I think it was Columbia, of a pianist I'd never heard of that she admired very much, Maryla Jonas, who was a Polish Jewish pianist who escaped Europe and wound up in Rio de Janeiro, and was having post-traumatic stress and had given up her career. And Rubinstein knew of her and had heard through the various grapevines that she was there. And she met him and refused to play the piano at all, but he had an upright piano sent to her. I mean, it's a very emotional and traumatic story. And she began to play finally, and then she actually began to develop a career and even had one or two or three successful recitals at Carnegie Hall in New York, and was quite the next sensational thing. But then she died of a rare tropical disease. I don't know that much about her. Anyway, I just never thought that very much of this opening until I heard her play it rather slowly and mournfully.
Yes, and I'll say you take it even further.
Yeah, but we're definitely made from this. I stole her genetic material, if you will.
Mhm.
But it moved me. It moved me flat out, including a trick that I don't know if I would recommend, but I dared to do it. In those days, we weren't quite as paranoid about not doing things in the score. When the B section of this very obsessive B section of this piece, it's all in E minor, but she does that thing which Anton Rubinstein was supposed to have done in the Funeral March. She just begins it very, very softly because it repeats 4 times, and then it repeats 4 more times later. There's a little lyric interlude, and then it builds up to a tremendous fortissimo. And I stole that too, and the jury didn't seem to mind.
Here's Maryla Jonas's recording. And here is Garrick Ohlsson performing the same passage from the 1970 Chopin competition.
I must have done it convincingly, because you can play things convincingly and beautifully, which are not exactly dynamic for what the composer wrote.
So you weren't arrested for grand theft Mazurka when you were in Poland?
No, indeed. And I tell students and people and pianists in master classes, the metronome police or the Ortex police are not going to come up to you when you're playing a concert somewhere and say, you didn't phrase that just right.
Garrick, you'd be surprised. And I'm working on this C-sharp minor one, and how interesting is it?
Yep, and it's also Phrygian, like the first piece.
Mm-hmm.
And there's Madame Lhévinne's harmonic change on the third beat, which brings emphasis to it whether you do anything or not. It's not just an accompaniment. It calls attention to itself. And it does what many mazurkas do. It evolves towards a boisterousness. That's almost good, sweaty fun.
He's really moving back and forth between this interior, private feeling and this sort of public, folksy occasion, isn't he? Especially in this piece, but it happens in a lot of them. There's this back and forth.
Exactly right, yeah. And it keeps evolving. By the way, there's a marvelous moment with those characteristic third beat accents. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And very often that would be Baudelarized in a polite Juilliard student performance, where we're told not to be crude, right? Don't,
Well, this is where so-called musicality is a real threat to actually great musicianship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not blaming the Juilliard students or the Curtis students or the Royal Academy students. It's just that if you really play some of these pieces the way maybe they're intended, or with the flavor that good Polish pianists bring to them, your teacher in a normal conservatory might say, well, that's very nice, Jim, but we really can't do that, can we?
Well, all you have to do is listen to Ignaz Friedman play some of these, and you'll know that you're allowed to get pretty boisterous.
Absolutely. And that was, to tell one more story about myself, in Warsaw, after I won the prize, Jan Weber, who was one of the chief critics there and head of music section for Polish radio, and even in communist times had access to incredible stuff. Before YouTube was not available generally, or at least until the age of CD when things got transferred. But he said very dryly, he was a very dry man, very brilliant, and said, now that you're the Chopin champion, he said, I'd like to introduce you to some different ways of playing Chopin that you didn't know. And he gathered a bunch of us, a bunch of candidates he liked. And he started back with Michalowski at the beginning of Polish piano playing, or recorded sound. But by the time we got to Friedman, I mean, our minds were completely blown anyway by many of the other pianists. But like to listen to Mazurkas, it's like, played by Friedman, it's like, oh my gosh, it's got to go that way. How else can it be at the moment?
Yeah, smart musicians like to say it's what's in between the notes in the score. Never is that more true than I think in these pieces. I remember it because I loved collecting scores in high school. I would read through pieces, and a lot of music does sort of come to you on the surface. At least some aspects of it, will speak to you immediately. Sight reading Mazurkas, I just felt like an idiot. It just sounded stupid to me often. I had absolutely no grasp of this spirit underneath them.
Me too, absolutely.
And this one has an apotheosis moment as well, a huge one.
It certainly does.
There's nothing like this in the Mazurkas, is there?
Not quite. Actually, this climax is tragic, but something that Chopin does a lot, and it may have to do with the tragic history of his country or his temperament or both, is the fact that sometimes it looks like things are going to turn out very well, and they very often don't at the end.
I was also going to say, maybe Chopin's real condition is represented in these, once it suddenly turns back to a piano dynamic on a dime, and this loud public, revolutionary outcry of sorts is in his head. That's not actually happening for him. And so, I mean, again, I'm waxing metaphoric and probably should stop. But anyway, it's what I mean. It's like clearly he had aspirations and dreams that were unfulfilled, that were patriotic and related to the potential flourishing of his country. And it's hard not to see a moment like this as unrealized, perhaps political or at least social, even if they're just personal dreams.
Or personal emotional reaction to what's going on externally.
Sure.
And even this incredible outburst it might be the almost Beethoven shaking fist at the unfairness at the fates, and then at the end there's just this sheer resignation.
Already in his very first Mazurka, Opus 6, number 1, this ain't no simple piece of music. There's a level of subtlety and complexity from the beginning when he's just maybe 19 or 20 years old.
And how? You got that right. It begins with one of those troubling things for us nowadays, is it begins with an accent. which I mentioned earlier. It's an invitation in to join in the dance, but it goes 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There's an accent on that third beat again. So that's done many ways. It can be done almost in tempo. Or you can do a characteristic little build of lilts, which is not unrelated to a waltz. And you can mix and match, because if you do it all the time the same way, it's going to get really annoying too, to yourself and to the listener. But it's the third beat is always is accented very often in the theme, and characteristically after this rising, it's risen, but now we get a hyperchromatic falling, so Chopin. That could have come out of his latest works too. That kind of morbid. So anyway, he sort of lays his personal cards on the table right from the first bars.
He was just sliding around chromatically since he was probably a preteen, it seems like. This is not later Chopin that does this. It's from the very beginning.
Then he has kind of a wild second section of the opening, which is fortissimo with crescendos. In the middle section, you have a lot of wrong notes, which is something else Chopin loves. He does a... Who in Europe was doing anything like that in 1830?
I don't know. And I also love just speaking of chromaticism, just the alternation between that F natural and the F sharp at the closing of the phrase in the thumb of the right hand. If you could just... Oh, just little things like that are so delicious. We heard a little almost drone-like thing in the right hand that you just played very loudly. And that brings me to a feature of these open fifths, which we find in Opus 6.
Accent on the second beat. You're right, Ben.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I'm not right. I was told that, and sometimes it's true. It sounds like bagpipes. I remember really liking the third from this opus as a kid, which, by the way, right from the beginning, you can't say it's only accents on the second beat because he delivers them on the third, the first, the second. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I want to move to Opus 7 because this was my first Mazurka, Opus 7, number 1, and I guess I thought it was easy enough to play it as a 10 or 11-year-old.
What did Schnabel say about Mozart? It's too easy for kids and too difficult for virtuosi.
Something like that, yeah.
This is one of the most famous Mazurkas, and people kind of know this one, but in the sixth bar, he ends on a wrong note. Yeah, I mean, I exaggerated like crazy to bring it out. He goes on for a while, and you get a taste of it coming back from this little... happens in the next episode.
Very exotic, shall we say.
Very exotic. I mean, you probably won't get a piano piece sounding like that until what, Bartok, I would say?
I mean, it's amazing. It's well, we have the augmented second, but it's not just the augmented second, because it's not like we're in a harmonic minor scale. We're built on a G flat drone here.
And he insists on it. He writes really bizarre music sometimes, as we know in that prelude and so on. So he gets very, very... It's something from a part of Europe that was not mainstream at the time. And yeah, I mean, what a tremendous imagination, and in the middle of a fun piece.
Forgetting about these particular pieces in Opus 7, but just thinking more largely about the feeling behind this music that's not printed on the page, we see that these are in 3/4 time, but there are famous testimonies from multiple credible individuals that Chopin actually played these more in 2/4 than in 3/4. Linz talks about Meyerbeer arriving in Chopin's room during one of Lenz's lessons, and we were playing the Mazurka in C, Opus 33, number 3, one page of music which seems nevertheless to contain hundreds. I called it the epitaph of the Mazurkas, so full does it seem of grief and sorrow, the weary flight of an eagle. Anyway, Meyerbeer took a seat and I continued. "That's in 2/4, said Meyerbeer. I had to repeat it while Chopin, pencil in hand, beat time on the piano. His eyes were blazing. 2/4, Meyerbeer calmly repeated. Only once have I ever seen Chopin lose his temper, and it was at that moment, and what a wonderful sight he was. A faint red suffused his pale cheeks. "It's in 3/4, he said in a loud voice. "Give me that piece as a ballet in my opera," retorted Meyerbeer. He was then working in secret on L'Africaine. "I'll prove it to you. It's in 3/4, Chopin almost yelled, who normally never raised his voice above a murmur. He pushed me aside and sat at the piano himself. 3 times he played the piece, counting aloud and stamping out the beat with his foot. He was beside himself. Meyerbeer still held his own, and they parted on bad terms. It pained me to have witnessed this scene. Without taking leave of me, Chopin had disappeared into his study. He was right, all the same, for though the third beat loses some of its value, submerged as it is in the flow of the melody, still it does not cease to exist."
Wow. Yeah, I read that when I was much younger, and I didn't know what to do with it.
We're still very confused, von Lenz. It's not helping us, but maybe you could try to capture something of what the hell Meyerbeer was hearing, because Lenz refers to the almost disappearance of the third beat. So what if, because there's an accent on the second beat, perhaps Chopin was having Lenz agogically emphasize the second, and therefore the second beat was delayed. Yes, and then hurried back to 1, 2, 1, 2. I can see that, but if you're coming in the room as Meyerbeer, you're not hearing what they're feeling yet, and it's a student playing, so it's not exactly exquisitely rendered. I can see how, if you really delay the second beat and emphasize it agogically, and then really rush the third beat.
Anyway, yes, I believe you.
I think that's right. Well, I've always wondered that. To get a glimpse of what Chopin might have been intending in the counting of this Mazurka, here is 20th century Polish pianist Henryk Sztomka performing it nearly in 2. Apologies in advance for the change in pitch. There's some very special mazurkas that I want to look at. And
yes, please.
One of them begins, it's the one that you pull out in music theory class in college, because you're supposed to have to try to analyze the opening of it. And that's Opus 17, number 4, in A minor, in scare quotes. Although, it doesn't feel like A minor for a minute there. It just feels very blurry. Could you show us the magic of this particular opening?
Yes, and I don't know how to play it, that's for sure. Yes, I mean, this piece is one of the most extraordinary because of that harmonic progression, which he likes so much, he repeats it again and again and again, and then it has a middle section on a drone, which builds up to quite a heat, and it's one of those major crescendos of Chopin that you think it's going to be all right, but then it isn't. So all the hopes are dashed. The piece ends the same way it begins, which makes it even more enigmatic.
If I had to analyze this in a cold and calculated way, I wouldn't write, oh, that's a 6 chord in first inversion at the end. I would say, more in jazz terms, no, that's A minor with the 6. It's an A minor that's incomplete, where the F never fell.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that feels like, and that makes more sense given that we are technically in A minor. He could have resolved it, but he never does.
And right at the recap, he does resolve it. So that's a big message there.
You're listening to a performance of Chopin's Mazurka, Opus 17, number 4, from the 11th National Chopin Competition in Miami, given by prize winner Angie Jong. This performance took place in the semi-final round, where all 12 remaining pianists were required to choose from a list of published sets of mazurkas. The Miami competition was a huge hit, attracting over 300,000 YouTube views during the week-long event and selling out the final round concerts. It was my privilege to host the live streams on behalf of the Chopin Foundation and interview the many talented competitors. Congratulations to all of the prize winners, and especially to gold medalist William Yang and silver medalist Anthony Ratanoff, both of whom earned automatic admission to the live rounds of the International Chopin Competition this October. To relive their prize-winning performances from the national competition and all the other great playing and fun conversations that took place in Miami, make sure you're subscribed to the Chopin Foundation YouTube channel.